Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom. Mir, ni hao, buenos dias, buenos tardes, buenas noches, heseche, aquaba, welcome. What up, though? This is a brief discourse on advisories for mixed race heritage brethren, mixed folk, mixed kinfolk. So I just finished recording a few minutes ago a joint on my personal bio, and it wasn't supposed to be that long. It was actually supposed to be just an intro to this, the crux of what I was have to share. So at this point, energy less, but concentrated dedication further. So I'm just gonna go through these notes about some concepts for mixed brethren who are searching. And that can be mixed brethren who've been deep in the game, as well as mixed brethren who were just introduced to it today. But these are concepts that seem less considered, less recognized within the popular discourse of mixed race kinfolk, at least amongst the activist groups that I am privy to on this continent, but also generally the few brethren, the few kinfolk in organizations that I regularly listen to, or I don't want to say check in on or anything, because that sounds somewhat pejorative, condescending, patronizing, but anyways, these concepts seem to be somewhat new or different than what a lot of folk are talking about. So simultaneously, it seems actually rather beneficial to provide some affirmation, to provide some information, to provide some foundation for reconciliation with oneself, affirmation of oneself, and relationship with others. So, without further ado, we get into the concepts. So the first one is affirmation. That's the category we're trying. So there are three steps to this joint, three parts to it. The first one is to recognize my mixed heritage. And to be honest, I have the terms mixed race heritage because some people talk about mixed race, some people talk about mixed heritage. We work on all these terms, so I include both of those in here. But for the moment, I say mixed race because mixed race tends to be further like militant or assertive, indifferent towards judgmentalism. So there's a certain gravitation towards mixed race. Mixed heritage tends to be increasingly all-inclusive, less controversial, less contentious race. Wow. Whereas heritage, So, but also recognizing that the mixed race experience also includes other phenomena as well, like mixed religiosity. And so that's not covered in that term directly, specifically. So mixed heritage is technically the further accurate term, but we're mindful of that shying away from the assertion, the affirmation of the mixed race experience, recognizing that it is a mixture between our tribes, mixing the blood. So we want to be increasingly mindful of that. So all that being said, where are we going with the terminology for this particular discourse? I think I'm just going to go with mixed heritage. Why? Because I just done stated the reason for mixed race, so there it is. But also, I was thinking about just doing mixed and letting it all go, but then that just seems too generic. So it seems to be beneficial to have some type of further noun in that joint. So I'm going with mixed heritage, just because mixed race heritage is just a lot of words to talk about. So, and like I said, mixed heritage is actually the further accurate joint. So if we have any concerns or suspicions about that there formidability, we can handle it in other ways too. All righteous, peaceful, and proper like. So here we go. Affirmation. My mixed heritage is a communal identity. Second joint. Our mixed heritage is an ancestral community. Third joint. Our mixed heritage ancestral community is the entire earth. So we're going to break those down a wee bit. The first joint, my mixed race heritage is a communal identity. I can go into like a lot of specifics about this, but we're going to keep this comparatively brief. So the main point of this is that so much of the mixed heritage, I'm going to go feel like we're referring to mixed race. So much of the mixed heritage discourse talks about identity and specifically personal identity, individual identity. And there's that tendency of being isolated because many people experience the experience of mixed heritage as individuals and feeling isolated, not knowing other people who share this. So there's legitimacy in having that conversation. But when we utilize that rhetoric, it continually perpetuates that experience. So to get out of that, to recognize, and not just to get out of it, but to recognize just the legitimacy of this in general, is this. If a brother has ancestry from Portugal and Angola, the brother is way beyond just that intersection of Portugal and Angola, only able to genuinely identify with other brethren who share that experience of Portugal and Angola, or other brethren who have some type of similarly proximate intersection of Portugal in other places or Angola in other places. The brother legitimately, thoroughly, 100 belongs to, is a part of, and walks all of Portugal and all of Angola. So it is communal. It's communal. And the brother belongs amidst all that. Communal. That's the first joint. It's not an isolation. It's not an oddity. It's communal. It's all. That's the first joint. Here we go. Second joint. Our mixed heritage is an ancestral community. So we just talked about ancestors. To recognize that this is beyond politics. This is beyond contemporary conventionality. This is beyond social identity and experience. It's even beyond emotion and our feelings and our psychology. We are part of, each of us is part of an ancestral community. And if we just look at a family tree, that looks like this. Each generation, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. Our ancestors have descendants that are our relatives, our blood relatives. And so we can recognize that as our clan, effectively, or our extended family. That is an ancestral community. And when we look at, well, that is an ancestral community. And that's what we are as mixed race people or mixed heritage people. An ancestral community. It's beyond a political identity. It's beyond a social identity. It's beyond a psychological angst or whatever else. It is an ancestral community. The third step. Do we go to the third step yet? There's further with the second step, but I'm leaving that as it is because we get back to that further in further detail. The third step, our mixed heritage ancestral community is the entire earth. So, if we look at that tree and we see that everybody on that tree we are blood with, but we also recognize that there are brethren on that tree, cousins, that have ancestors that are other than our immediate ancestors, at least in intermediate stages. They have uncles and aunties and additional brethren, grandparents that are different from our specific ancestral lineage. That's still part of our ancestral community. And this is actually the second part I was talking about. So even though some of their blood relatives are presumably other than our blood relatives, we're still connected with their blood relatives because that's part of our ancestral community. So that's part of the definition of the ancestral community. Not necessarily the most clear and direct, but that's what it is. So when our relatives, we are associated with the relatives of our relatives. That's ancestral community. And so as mixed people, as mixed heritage brethren, kinfolk, that is the increasing experience of the definition of our community. It's ancestral, extensive. And then so we get back to this third step of recognizing that. So where does it end? Where does it stop? Where do we draw the line? How about this? It's the entire earth. Because when we extend that relatives of relatives, it's easier to see, I think, these days when we are working with like 3 or 4 degrees of separation, that literally we're all kinfolk. We're all cousins. Even I mentioned in the previous joint, like even the remotest indigenous people that abstain from having any contact with human brethren, yes, we're related. Why? Because we can look at anecdotally, at some point we can discern there is some type of interaction, even if a brother or a sister from one of the tribes goes and socializes with the convention in distant lands or whatever. But at some point, there's some type of, well, I'm not even giving, that's not the point. That's and it's presumptuous as well. Who's going to prove it? It's not a scientific positing anyway. So, but I still contend. I still share that affirmation. Our mixed heritage ancestral community, all our relatives of our relatives, is the entire earth. So, the entire earth is mixed heritage. The question is, what type of mixed heritage are we? We can be all Anglo-Saxon, even there's mixed heritage, but we can be all Anglo. That's the type of mixed heritage one is. One can be Mandarin, Zulu, Arab, Guarani, Inuit, Japanese, and that's mixed heritage. So that the purpose of that, each of those stages is very important, because again, the first one, getting away from just the individual isolation trope. The second one, further strengthening the concept and our experience of connection and relationship with ourselves, and in our ancestors, and in recognizing that continuity, both in time and space. And then also the third one, recognizing that it's all inclusive and everybody is legit equally belonging, regardless of how people identify. And the purpose of that one particularly is to like, it's not to like, but it is to evolve the norm and the baseline of discussion about race, to recognize everybody's mixed. It's just a question of what type of mixed one is. And so again, one can be just very homogeneous in that mix, and some can be very heterogeneous in that mix. But in contextualizing in that respect, there's an increased amount of honesty, and then there's also a decrease of contentiality, an increased amount of congruency. Because if we look at the earth and we're going to define like what is the official race of the earth, would not be able to honestly decide that, even if you just look at numbers and pick the one that has the largest population. That is one methodology, and it's even then it ain't accurate. And so it's a matter of recognizing the phenomena of mixed race, of mixed heritage, is a transcendent phenomenon. And it's no better, no worse than whatever else is. But recognizing that it's not an ethnicity actually to begin with. It's an experience, because mixed race applies to anybody of any type of ethnicity. So it doesn't define like a geography, a bloodline, or anything else like other ethnic identifiers are. One can get lost in the race trope because race is comparatively meaningless as well. But particularly ethnicity is what we're looking at. Mixed is not an ethnic category. It is an experience. legit and everything else, but the point is, like, it's a different phenomena. And if one were to look at, say, what's the official ethnicity of the Earth, it's mixed. If we're going to say anything, you can say it's other, but you can't say it's European, you can't say it's African, you can't say it's Middle Eastern, Arab, East Asian, South Asian, native. Well, you actually can't say it's native effectively, but when we're talking about native in this context, we're talking about brethren, particularly of the Western Hemisphere, who are native, as well as additional places that have been unduly colonized and imperialized. But anyways, there's an absence of one specific bloodline that one can categorically define as the official bloodline of the Earth. And mixed heritage, the nature of that is all-inclusive of all that. So when we frame the discussion about race and ethnicity in that context, the distinctions between our ethnicities and our bloodlines becomes, again, less contentious, becomes increasingly congruent. Not necessarily the same, obviously not the same, and not necessarily with the objective of blurring everything and mixing everything. That's not the intention either. It's a matter of first of all, recognizing mixed as a thing, mixed heritage as a thing, and also recognizing it as a norm. And again, it's not I was about to say the standard, and that might seem somewhat contradictory to what I just described. It is a beneficial foundation through which to have the discussion about ethnicity and race. I'm just going to go back to that. And this is, again, somewhat off topic as well, or a tangent, I should say. But the other thing is this. In this post-industrialized, postmodern, post society, civilization, where, particularly in Western society, there's this emphasis of multiculturalism and diversity, universities, corporations, governments, and additionally, right there, anything that's multicultural, it's mixed heritage. That's it. If a university has a population or a student population of multiple ethnicities, that's a mixed race, a mixed heritage university. Same thing with the government, same thing with a corporation, and further. So that rationale is it's a different line of rationale than what I just described. But again, the purpose, where I go back to, is, again, establishing a foundation for having discussion concept about ethnicity and race. And that baseline of mixed heritage is an all-inclusive and genuine premise from which to have that discussion, that categorization, those policies, and further. It's not mixed race imperialism, again, of making all nations mixed race, or even imposing that upon all nations or any nation. But it is a process of normalizing the relations between nations. So I'm going to just leave it at that. That's the affirmation. That's the first joint. How about that? 20 minutes. Here we go into the second joint. Knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. Knowledge of self is an awareness, a knowledge of the divine presence that exists within. And we may have different vocabulary, vernacular to describe that, but sacredness, holiness, value, merit, worth, legitimacy, relevance, that exists within us. And not just a little bit just to do menial things for other people. The highest, the greatest. Now, if that's controversial to somebody, yeah. So, and I mean, if that's controversial for somebody to acknowledge that within somebody else, we can have a convo about that. If that's something controversial for somebody to believe about oneself, we can have a convo about that. But it's very beneficial. It's very important to have that convo, and to continue that convo, and to continue that awareness, because that's, again, foundational. So that's the beginning of knowledge of. Now, further in this notion, this experience of knowledge of self, it's a knowledge of one's ancestral language. So knowing who one's ancestors are, where one's ancestors come from, and also the language that one's ancestors communicate within. It doesn't have to be 100% fluency or whatever. It's beneficial, but we're not doing judgmentalism or whatever else. Just being mindful that it's beneficial and to make an effort. Even just learning some words, some terms, some names, is beneficial. And my proficiency is very modest, so but it's still beneficial, and I continue to learn. And from that come our songs and our stories and our rituals and our ethics from our ancestors. That is a significant part of knowledge of self, because those traditional songs and stories and rituals and ethics teach us about knowledge of self. It is a timeless continuum of that awareness. And our calendars are the relationship with the cycle of Earth, the seasons, through which we have these rituals and through which we practice the songs and stories and maintain the ethics accordingly. So those are all the elements, are elements of knowledge of self. Now, awareness of the divine presence within ourselves, some knowledge of our ancestral language, and then the stories, song stories, and rituals of and ethics. Knowledge of our ancestral language, knowledge of our song stories, rituals, and ethics, and also knowledge of our calendars. So that helps to solidify us within as much as possible. It's not a matter of putting pressure on or whatever else. Just recognizing that, just like if you run in a healthy way, it helps fitness. If you do calisthenics, it helps the muscle fitness. If you learn about your ancestry, it helps with the mindset. So that's what it is. Knowledge of self. Then we go into discipline of self. So discipline of self is the regular routine practice of knowledge of self. Again, that awareness, the languages, songs, stories, rituals, ethics, and the calendars. On a moment-to-moment basis, a daily basis, weekly basis, moon-to-moon, yearly basis, and further during the different life cycles and rituals of life. So it's the regular routine practice of knowledge of self. And I particularly emphasize ethical discipline amongst mixed brethren because, one, for anybody of any heritage and ilk, ethical discipline strengthens and nurtures stability within ourselves as individuals and those who practice it as well collectively. And it also instills authority. When we start doing certain things right in a certain way, it intrinsically cultivates authority within ourselves. We can speak experientially about the practice of that discipline, about those ethics, and we can share that with colleagues, we can share that with elders, we can share that with youth and children. So there's an intrinsic authority that comes from that experience of practicing those ethics that's valuable for others, particularly for those who are receptive to listening. And it also cultivates trust, because when people see one practicing those ethics, they don't have to like cats. They don't have to agree with cats on everything, but they can see, okay, we can trust that cat for doing that because we see what that cat is doing. That's one of the reasons why I emphasize ethical discipline. I'm going to go further into this as well. Congruence. So when we come from different heritages, different traditions, different languages, different ways of doing things, it's been beneficial to identify a congruence, a continuity amongst these traditions. What is the common thing that all my peoples, all my communities, all my ancestors do? Because when we can then focus on that congruence is just our own practice, and also to honor and optimize our relationships. Optimize our relationships sounds very commercial, but we can honor and strengthen and nurture our relationships with our relatives from all our different ethnic heritages and communities through the practice of those ethics that are shared by all those communities. And so we might abstain from practicing everything within every tradition. But if we're able to identify a core of the important things, and even as it doesn't even have to be like the exact same things, but if we identify a core of each one and a congruent lifestyle that practices each one, again, we establish stability within ourselves. We're not jumping all around. We're centered with who we are and what we do. We also cultivate authority. Like, yo, I do that too. I can tell you about something. Oh, did you try this? How about that? So we cultivate authority within each of our ethnic communities wherein we practice that ethic. And then also trust. Our communities see us like, yo, they do that too. Okay, we can send them an invite to participate in this one. We might need that person for this event over here. We can trust them for that. They did it before the other day or the other week or the other year. So again, it has pragmatic benefits. And it's not the purpose for doing it. You just do it because it's beneficial to do, but it does translate into increasing harmony with the earth and conditions, including conventions. So behooves. Congruence, core. Now, in my path, what I find, I identify with earth. And in doing that, I study earth. And in doing that, I find a core of ethics that are shared by the earth. Now, the Buddha refers to this specifically as the Panchasilas and as the foundational discipline, the ethical discipline for cultivating the Buddhist spiritual path in one's life and one's practice. So this Panchasilas includes 5 ethical principles that are honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing. Not necessarily in that order and not necessarily with those same vocabulary or like terminology in translation because it's all Pali, so it's not English. But those are basically the ones. Honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing. Now, again, like I said, that's not just a Buddhist thing. That exists within the vast number of religious traditions and cultural traditions around the earth. And so when we focus on that, and now some of those might seem, yeah, of course, but when we actually practice those things, like legit and even thoroughly, it's easier said than done. But when it's done, it's worth something to be said. Stability, authority, and trust within all the traditions that share those principles. So again, core, congruence, cooperation. So that's the Panchasilas. Those are 5 accessible. People can practice that. People might call that judgmental, patriarchy. Those are tangential accusations. And that might seem rather condescending, dismissive, disrespectful. But at the same time, purpose, priorities. A lot of cats can make a lot of accusations about a lot of different things, and that distracts attention and everything and focus from what's being done. So already I didn't spend a minute talking about that, hypothetically. So that's Panchasilas. Now we can go even further. We can take that same foundation and find other additional principles, add to it. That's what we do with Wealth Ethos, our rendering of Wealth Ethos. It's appropriate for me to provide that Wealth Ethos is a term that's utilized by did I say Deutsch? I think I did recently. He's a Swiss theologian, Dr. Hans Kung. His foundation is based in Deutschland, which why I keep on doing that. But he's a contemporary Swiss theologian who works with a number of religious leaders from around the earth, specifically with the Parliament of the World's Religions, and identifies a global ethic, a wealth ethos, that is shared by the many different traditions of the earth. And in that, they include 4 principles, which basically are the same 4 that I just mentioned, with the absence of the sobriety principle. So that, to be honest, to give due respect and acknowledgement, that is the utilization of, that's where the term wealth ethos comes from. I mean, it may very confidently originate before the term is utilized 20 years ago. But our utilization of the term comes from that work of Dr. Hans Kung. So we want not to appropriate or steal or anything else like that. But so we provide due respect and honor accordingly. So, but that being said, we also recognize some additional principles that are considered appropriate to include within the further rubric. Now, some of these principles may involve additional amount of discussion for there to be thorough consensus. That's fine. Each rendering provides its own purpose and functionality. So we have two versions. One has 11 principles, and then the other one has 16. The same 11 plus 5 additional ones. Am I doing that? I guess I do that. So I'll recite the first 5, or the first. Well, yeah, I told you what the 4 are of the original version of Walt Ethos Quattro, and then the once, the 11 principles, there's actually a mantra, and I'll share the mantra. Ahimsa Ubuntu Veritas Haya Shu Makohuga Samadhi Shema Shobono Narap. And then the additional 5 are Nisamanfo Academia Sadaji Gambaro and Forgiveness. Now, for a further translation and definition and commentary about those principles, I invite you to check out the recent video I record that gives all that information. So I ain't putting it in here because that took about 20 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, something like that. So don't feel like doing that on this one, because when people see that, they're like, yo, I ain't watching that. So already half an hour. So we're a very discerning crowd. Anyways, third joint, love of self. Love of self is inner peace, security. When we practice discipline of self and knowledge of self, that's the tranquility we gain through that. So it's described in many different ways in many different languages and traditions, but that's knowledge of self. But it continues further. It's that peace, inner peace and tranquility, and also the sharing of that inner peace and tranquility with others. Love of self. And so that's the trifecta: knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. And particularly as it pertains to people of multiple, almost there. Some word that means heritage, ancestry, but starts with a P. Well, I ain't gonna be too jokey. It is later, so I'm being mindful of that. I gotta concentrate because sometimes things get silly, unduly too. So continuing on, advisory for mixed brethren. So this is like some practical advice for mixed brethren about how to go about this path, because already what I've shared, people be like, "Yo, what?" So here's like some practical advice from wherever you're at this moment. First part of this is to find your ancestors, as best as you are currently able to do. Find out where your ancestors are from, the geography, the name of the group of your ancestors, the language that's spoken, the tradition that's practiced. If you know the names of your ancestors as much as possible, as distant into your lineage as possible, that is beneficial. So that's the first step, just identifying your ancestry. When brethren or kinfolk are adopted, and additionally, again, as best as possible at this moment, just identify the geography. And then what is the traditional language of that geography, and what could it be expected to be for one's ancestors who come from that geography historically. So as best as possible, there's not an examination by anybody else on this earth for that. It's just for you and yours. So with that, when you do that to a satisfactory degree, and again, satisfactory to your standards and your truth, then the invitation is to draw a map, to recognize where that geography is of all your ancestors that you're aware of, and to draw a map that connects the areas of all those regions, of all those specific geographies, and to recognize that as your map. That's like the map of your ancestral heritage, with that map established, to consider and to imagine and discern the path of migration of your ancestors from these lands all the way to where you are and who you are today at this very moment. So that's the second invitation. The third invitation is somewhat of a leap, but it is appropriate. All right. And it is this, to recognize that whatever that map is, whatever those geographies are, whoever your ancestors are, there is a higher law. There is a higher authority that guides all of your ancestors, whatever the tradition, religion, or otherwise. The same highest authority guides all of your ancestors through all the generations to where you are today and who you are today at this moment. We can call that higher authority some of the prominent names: God, Tao, Brahman, Allah, Great Mystery. We can call it the law of science. We can call it kismet. We can call it serendipity. We can call it karma, fate. The Great Mystery. But that same highest authority guides all your ancestors. So there is a continuity, there is a continuum, and there is an intentionality of where you are and who you are, and a continuation with preceding generations. So, God willing, that's a leap, but is beneficial. Again, that's that part of the knowledge itself and the inner peace and security that knowledge provides, that trust provides. So we're beyond proofs at this point, so it's a different realm. Now, that being said, we get into the fourth step, or the fourth invitation, numero cuatro, which is making a decision. And the decision is, when we recognize that we are mixed, it's a matter of deciding, making a decision. What type of mixed are we going to be? So there are three different categories that I basically describe as an option to answer that solution. One category is assimilation, like just going with the flow with one particular culture or tradition. It might be one of one's ancestry. It might be a completely different ancestry where one just finds oneself and is just trying to make do best with one can. So there's legitimacy within that. That's people's prerogative. That's one decision. That's one category of a solution. Second category is to only identify and involve oneself with the specific geography of the ancestry from which one is derived. So that might be a comparatively congruent geography, like within a specific area of the continent. So it can be rather pragmatic just to focus on that and just look at everyone else as an other. It may be an extended geography where there's a large number of people who share that experience and so share in that narrative and the continuation of that unique experience, heritage, and culture and tradition. It may be a number of different tribes, but a number of different scenarios. But in either of those cases, it's just a matter of just focusing on what one's ancestry is and just focusing on that. There's legitimacy within that too. The third category is identifying with the entire earth. And so again, the actuality, the truth of it is that the experience, the phenomena of being mixed, again, is the entire earth. There's an absence of a boundary ethnically around this. Now, because one can be Arab and indigenous, one can be East Asian and Ethiopian. So the phenomena of being mixed involves the entire earth. And when we look at our mixed experience in terms of a contemporary experience with politics, economics, community building, organization building, and additionally, we can look at those first two options to build organizations accordingly, and organizations are already doing that. But we can also look at that third option of building world-based organizations and intentionality, cooperation, communication accordingly. And there's legitimacy within that. There's benefit within that. So in either of these respects, it's beneficial to make a decision and to be intentional with it, rather than just kind of like float with whatever currents and streams arrive to stake some claim. And I don't mean that in a conquering type sense or ownership type sense, but within a self type sense. Like, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, this is what I commit to. So there's that. Dot. Then the next step is actually that building self, building family, and building community. So whatever the decision is that you make, to continue with that and live that, and do that as your own individual. Do that with marriage with a spouse, having children, building family, doing that with community of those who share in that type of commitment, and to continue life accordingly, sharing the languages, the songs, the stories, the rituals, and the ethics of your heritage from that decision, and continuing to build. So there's that. So that's the sequence of the advisory for mixed kinfolk. So now we get to where we have two other joints to share. So the second one is commitment hierarchy. The commitment hierarchy provides a framework to consider how much one is dedicated to a cause, and some of these situations, a person may seem very dedicated to a cause, but in actuality, not so much. So this helps us to kind of put things in perspective, to be increasingly accurate in our assessments about our own commitments, what we actually think is important, and how we evidence this by how we contribute and involve ourselves within it, but also the commitments or lack thereof of others. So that's helpful when we do this building self, family, and community. So here's the hierarchy. I'll say the terms, then I'll explain each one again, God willing. These are the 5 terms: charity, tithing, almshouses, study, and vow. So that's where it is: charity, tithing, almshouses, study, vow. So the first one is charity. We give when we can, when we're asked sometimes. We might give a lot, we may give little, and it's beneficial. It's appreciated. It does beneficial things. So we don't poo-poo that. We appreciate that dutifully. But we also recognize that we can't bank on that. We can't plan extensively with just what one might provide at some point, maybe. So whilst it is beneficial, it is not necessarily optimal. So that's charity at this level. We can give with money, we can give with volunteer hours, and in other different types of ways. But again, if it's here and there, it's spotty. And if it's spotty, it's spotty. So that's charity. And I don't want to discourage charity, because it's very valuable. And to be honest, probably the majority of contributions for benevolent causes, I can't say that. Nah. I'll say this: don't sleep on charity, and don't sleep on those little pennies, or little peas, or little. I know the basic unit of currencies, but the smaller unit of currencies from different nations is fairly difficult for me to think of, and I don't want to belittle or disrespect other currencies. So I'm going to quell my internationality at this specific moment in that respect. So that being done, we continue on. Don't sleep on the little coinage, because that adds to mega amounts when we look at the aggregate population, because the aggregate population provides that. So there's a lot, but again, it's just difficult to plan from that and build from that, as particularly as a smaller community. So that's charity. Tithing. Okay, now we're giving a portion of what we earn each month, each week, each year, and so we can plan on that. Somebody has promised to do this, and so now we recognize that they've been doing it for a while. So for the next year, we can plan on it again. So now we're getting better, but at the same time, I'm getting better in terms of like the stability of the cause. And again, this is applicable. This commitment hierarchy is applicable to all different types of causes, from religious congregations to activist causes, to educational institutions or whatever else. It's a framework that's applicable to families and additionally. So, commitment hierarchy. Tithing. A portion of one's income every regular period. Daily, weekly, monthly, moonly, yearly, and further. Beneficial, but still it's only a portion of what they earn, and it's comparatively modest. So there's only so much, even when we can plan on it, there's only so much we can do with those plans because the amount is comparatively modest. So we get to the third level, the almshouses. So that's when we get to investments, large investments that directly build the infrastructure of the cause, the systemic practice of the cause. Building a residential house or building of flats that house people who share in the cause. Building a kitchen, I'm trying to think of like a communal eating place. Interesting tension of vocabulary in this experience, but a dining hall, or I don't want to say soup kitchen because that may give an inaccurate connotation, but it builds the infrastructure, and it enhances, it facilitates the systemic practice of that cause. So there it is. Now those are beneficial, but that's not the highest. That's not the highest commitment. That's not the highest offering to a cause. Because many people say, "Oh yeah, that's the third, that's above everything else," but not everybody can afford that. So it sounds very classist just to put that above everybody else. How about this? The next one, the fourth one, study. Anybody can study, and it's a greater commitment. It's a greater offering to the cause than any of those, or than those previous three. Study. Whatever the cause is, study the history, the principles, the narratives, the names, the people, all that. The songs, rituals, ethics, all that. Study that of the cause. Learn it. When you learn it, then you're able to teach it and share it. And that strengthens the cause way further than each of those three. Each of the previous three are necessary. Don't get it twisted. But if we're going to be like scrutinizing and even judgmental about who's providing most, this and the other, study is fourth level. Study. So then we get to the next level beyond that. What? It gets higher. Vow. The vow is when we promise to live by the principles of our cause. So whatever those principles are, whatever the discipline, whatever the ethics are, whatever the commandments of the cause are, whatever the prohibitions of the cause are, we promise we live by that. And so that's a further commitment, a further contribution. It usually comes after considerable study, a fair amount of study, and most likely each of at least the first two joints. Vow. So, within the practice, the political methodology of ethocracy, it is a rule by ethics, meaning that those who rule are those who take that vow to practice those ethics and are held accountable to the practice of those ethics. So it's other than a meritocracy, it's other than a democracy, it's other than a monarchy. It is an ethocracy. Anybody within the cause has access generally speaking, to participating in that council of leadership. I'm getting a little bit specific and a little bit tangential in this joint, but that's autocracy. I'm not going to get into too much about autocracy, but the purpose of this right now is to talk about commitment hierarchy, and the highest one is vow. And so I'll just leave it at that for the moment. That's the highest commitment, vow. Now we get to our concluding joint, which is the logic of God. How about that? Do we have the energy? Do we have the stamina? Do we have the concentration? All right, let's get this done. Very compassionately and balanced and mindfully. Here we go, God willing. Right there. What about that? Here we go. This is 3 primary statements, but 4 statements to be honest and factual. It's 4 statements that are like statements of fact. And they're offered as true statements, as logical statements, as statements of logic. And it actually doesn't even involve faith necessarily, or like everything in my estimation involves faith. That's difficult for me to say that, but it abstains from relying on faith for its logical proof. It's a logical statement. The logic stands and speaks for itself. So I make these statements, and people can argue, disagree, agree, celebrate, jeer, or whatever else accordingly. But these are the statements. The first, and this is all about God, and this is about understanding the nature of God, the belief in God, the disbelief in God, and additionally, reconciliation is the purpose that we're reaching in this exercise. So, it does involve some patience and yeah. All right, here we go. The first statement is this: God exists. And that's just a true statement. Now, the nature of the way in which God exists, that's a whole nother conversation, and that's abstains from being defined in that first statement. It's just a plain, simple statement: God exists. I'll give some examples of like that spectrum of how God exists. Some may perceive God as a delusion. Some may believe God as the ultimate reality, the ultimate authority. Some may believe God is just some ambiguous whatever. But in any of these respects, just very logically, once you say something, once you acknowledge, when you say something, you're acknowledging the existence of something. If I say pink elephants, right there, pink elephants exist. It might just be an imaginary figmentation, but it still exists, and it's just a matter of understanding the nature of how it exists. So the same thing with God. Once an atheist says there is no hey, how about that? Once an atheist proclaims the absence of the existence of God and utilizes the term God or the concept God in stating that, right there, that's an affirmation of the existence. So it's an untrue statement. It's a logical fallacy. And that applies to whatever, again, it could be anything. Once somebody says it doesn't exist, it exists. So, and that's just a matter of being honest. All right, that's the first step. I'm repeating myself and I'm looking at my eyes and pink, don't got pink eye, but that's fatigue. Or maybe just be the lighting joint or whatever. But anyways, sleep is in order and I haven't had dinner yet. Aww. So, all right, one is existence. Or God exists. The second statement is this: there is a singularity of this universe. There is something that has all this together. However many universes people say there are, the meta-universes, the metaphysics, how many realms of dimensions, how many heavens there are, and everything else like that, it's all, eventually there's a oneness that brings it, that holds it together, that keeps it together, takes it apart, whatever else. There's a oneness to it. So, now how we describe that oneness, or what name we apply to that oneness. Again, some people might say God, but we can say all the names of God: Allah, Brahman. We can say Buddha nature. We can say the law of science as that singularity, ultimate singularity. We can say great mystery, which I think is an appropriate term from native tradition to describe that ultimate singularity. But whatever it is, whatever name we utilize to describe it, and all the things that come with that name, to just recognize logically everything that can be conceived, everything that is beyond conception, is still all part of one type of phenomenon. Again, that's just a statement of fact. So that's the second joint. Third joint is that ultimate singularity, that everything, and beyond everything, everything. Within it, there is sentience, because I perceive myself as having sentience. I perceive others as having sentience. And so we are all part of that singularity. That means that the singularity includes sentience. There is sentience within that singularity. Now, about whether the singularity has a further independent, omnipotent, omniscient sentience, we abstain from making that statement in this. It's just a matter of recognizing that sentience exists within the ultimate singularity. Point blank, full stop, plain and simple, logical statement. So that's the third joint. So the fourth joint is this. It kind of brings it all together. Some people believe that God is the ultimate singularity. It's difficult for an atheist or anybody. And I don't mean to be antagonistic or atheist. All atheist kinfolk love and peace. Like, we're all part of the same fold. But I'll explain why I'm having this, sharing this joint at the moment. And I just utilize the experience of atheism as a way of like explaining like the categorical, like cynic or critic or challenger of these statements. So I'm saying even to that degree, because I'm uncertain, we can get into like things like devil worshippers or whatever else, but I'm uncertain if devil worshippers actually discount or deny the existence of God. So that's a different kind of conversation. But and I don't mean to like equate atheism to devil worshippers. So I'm like unnecessarily digging myself into a hole. So holes can be beneficial, but at the moment, completion is somewhat preferred. So again, the fourth statement is just some people believe that God is this ultimate singular reality. So that's the fourth statement. Now from there, we convo. We talk about that. So what is the nature of that singular reality? Like, what are the characteristics of that singular reality? And I will say now that I actually agree with atheists. I deeply believe in God. I'm devoted. I have a devoted belief in God. But I agree with atheists, because what I recognize is that atheists are responding to much of the BS that many people commit for a long time, many millennia, through this day and ongoing, in the name of God, proposing or claiming, feigning the authority of God for the purpose of selfishness, greed, murder, rape, thievery, colonization, imperialization, all the nasty things on this earth people have done in one way or another in the name of God. So it's very logical and rational and legit and honest for someone to say, oh, if that's the case, I don't believe in God, because I have to be mindful of what I say and how I articulate this. But an atheist responding to those claims by not believing in God because they're observing what the actions are, and if that's coming from the authority that the people are claiming, then not believing in that authority. It's very easy to make that kind of assertion. Now, again, I'm going to say I do believe in God. So I agree with atheists on that point, because that the name of God, the authority of God, the concept of God is woefully, atrociously, heinously for many millennia through this day. But at the same time, it's appropriate to recognize that those are people and institutions. We can include that, and there's a difference between that and the concept of God, the authority in the name of God. So rather than like getting into the crux of and the nitty gritty of that differentiation, it's even just as we are just thinking further about the nature of that singularity, and being as honest as we can about that, and then when there's the occasion, to relate that to where we are today within our relationships with religious communities, and additionally, and this is one of the reasons, getting to the point of why I'm sharing all this. But before I do, I'll say one other thing. The other thing I agree about belief in God, and this is my personal belief, or the belief within the tradition that I practice, is like the things about like the personification of God, applying a gender to God, and additionally, even within the vast many number of religious traditions that proclaim belief in God, there's recognition that God is beyond personification, that God exists beyond gender, and that gender is utilized. Well, I'm not going to give a rationale for why gender is utilized, but just a recognition that God exists beyond those things. So it's increasingly accurate and appropriate to refer to God in those terms, beyond personification and beyond gender. And actually, in the tradition I practice, that is done. However, that being said, there's another side to that, which is this: for many people, it's helpful to experience the phenomena of relationship, particularly relationship with God, when utilizing personifying terms and concepts. So there's understanding for that. And I don't mean to be going to like a rationalization, but this is when we get into the further discourse. But the 4 points have already been stated. This is the discussion afterwards. But just my point is just to recognize many of these methodologies, these tendencies, behaviors, and concepts of describing God and connection with God is a way to help people to experience that connection and relationship in an optimally immediate way. So some people are able to experience that proficiency without personification, and just vibe with that on that level. Some people have that proclivity of personal relationship and being able to experience that oneness, that togetherness through the context of personal relationship. So anyways, again, like I said, that's getting into the discussion. So it's a little bit ahead of what the purpose is at the moment. So why am I sharing all this? Because what I recognize in our mixed race, our mixed heritage diaspora, particularly the one that I am particularly immediately privy to in my 20 years of involvement through conferences and discussions and all this stuff on social media, and additionally, is that much of the vocal part of our mixed heritage diaspora, particularly English speaking, of which I'm most familiar with, has a very secular and even liberal leanings or tendencies, and a lot of that comes from a reaction to judgmentalism, either as mixed people, convention having certain dispersions, and additionally, and so mixed brethren finding additional acceptance amongst others who are experiencing similar persecution, even for different reasons, particularly behavioral reasons, and so the result of that is a comparatively secular ideology and expectations and norm, set of beliefs, and additionally, and much of that involves a very robust disbelief or disinterest in God, and the further consideration is that when we talk about our mixed heritage ancestral community of earth, we are talking about all our mixed brethren. We're talking about all the earth. And when we look at all the earth, we can fairly recognize that much of the earth actually does believe in God, is religious, is conservative, has different values than the activist scene of Western civilization. And if we're going to be honest and genuine and effective and enduring in building our mixed heritage diaspora, because that's what is most prudent when we look at the individual interests of our respective communities, cliques, and congregations. So that was just another word for saying groups. It is beneficial for us to have that global, because then again, the mixed race experience is intrinsically global. So when we do that, and we do that genuinely, that means having genuine, thorough relationships with people who believe in God, even with people who haven't heard of anything else other than that. So ain't everybody in the mixed community got to be religious literate. But to recognize that a genuine mixed advocacy includes such literacy. And even, well, to be honest, even reconciliation within ourselves. Because again, much of our ancestral heritage, respectively, involves ancestors who live in and either believe in and practice within communities and traditions that believe in God in one way or another, from indigenous and heathen, pagan, and additionally to the major organized religions of the earth today. So again, it's beneficial just to have a honest, logical framework to perceive that, because it's foundational within our own experience individually. So that's the joint for this joint. About an hour. That ain't too long. So I'm being mindful of this as well, because I'm sharing a lot of stuff. And anyway, that's about it. I think we're gonna wrap it up with that. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom. Mir Zaijin, adios te chakaris, esimpe na asamuje, kirlik ofred. One love and peace, happiness, liberation.